Good afternoon, good morning, konnichiwa. Thank you for inviting me to share my views on startups of the future. Speaking about the future, given the fact that I'm in New York today and you're in another time zone, it's almost as if I'm speaking in the future. My name is Ciprian Morar. I'm the CEO and founder of Lateral, which is a design and technology company. And over the last 25 years, I've had the luxury of building a lot of products, working with small startups, very big corporations, assisting them in M&A, advisory solutions, etc. My beginnings, however, were very humble. I was born in Transylvania, a region in the middle of Romania, and over the last many years, I've been working with a great team. The beginning was very humble. That's the first place where I built my first company, and I'm very blessed today to share this kind of environment with over 300 people all around the world. Now, speaking about hard work, I've literally worked everywhere on tatami mats in Japan, in trains, on top of mountains, in taxis, in planes, sometimes outside a pool, and very rarely inside a pool. All of that to say that in the last 3 years, I've dedicated my life to software quality to figure out what works and what doesn't, what does it take to deliver on time, on budget, on quality, and what's zero to happy for me. And I know this may mean different things for different people. This journey has taken me everywhere, and I've spent time in Europe, Eastern Europe, Silicon Valley, New York, Florida, Asia, and Pacific, and so on. And I guess I've learned that success and failure are two sides of the same coin, and maybe we should coin a new term, start down rather than start up, because I've had so many failures. I've seen what it's like to be small and big, what's like to be local and global as well. Another learning, I've realized that startups aren't for everybody. It takes a lot of courage, a lot of risk, a lot of sacrifices, a ton of work. And from that perspective, you could argue that startups aren't for the people that prefer things to be nice and quiet. At the same time, I think startups are for everybody and that you could achieve, creativity, taking risks, experimenting in any environment, even in the existing house, company, setup, wherever you are. So here's my perspective on some opportunities. Let's look first at the origins of startup. And the earliest time I could trace the notion of a startup was back in prehistoric times when trading was happening in a gift economy. Later on, I found out the oldest company in the world was founded in 578, 1400 years ago, in Japan. It's still operating today under the umbrella of a construction company. But of course, when you talk about startups, you have to talk about Silicon Valley. And this notion of startups grew out of Fred Terman, who's a legendary dean of Stanford Engineering School. And this guy encouraged faculty members to start companies after they finish their schooling. So, Silicon Valley is unique in a sense that a lot of things were happening at the same time and very interesting dynamics play. And you could read a lot about, it's wonderful industry, history. But I guess, the transistor was born there, silicon chips, when that's kind of where the name comes from. But at the same time, originally Stanford was a prototyping studio for the Department of Defense. And so defense kind of came in first. Then all of that money attracted talent. You ended up having entrepreneurship, venture money, and the venture money kind of fueled the consumer application cycle. Now, Silicon Valley is unique in that sense because you've got the military and space explorations with NASA and all these amazing universities and talent and money with Sand Hill Road and all the venture firms. But I guess the most important thing we should probably export outside is the attitude, especially attitude towards failure, where it's accepted and risk and, there's no adversity for that. The collegiality, helping each others. Since then, startups have taken further developments. We have to speak about things like accelerators, and Y Combinator is one of the famous names out there. More capital invested, PE firms and angels and family offices, as well as the notion of unicorns. And anybody wants to be a unicorn, a name given for the rarity of these over $1 billion startups. One day, perhaps, I'll be a unicorn. But you know what? Not all startups were intentional. In fact, I found that most are not. Take Airbnb, for example. They started renting out their air mattress. That's where the name comes from. And on the right, you see their old website. Take Facebook, originally a hot or not site, and you can see today the kind of immense scale of the social media platform that we have. Instagram, originally a photo filter, that's become much bigger. That dog is very famous, one of the first Instagram photos posted as a test. Uber on the right hand side used to be called Uber Cab. So that's their first site. Look at how very basic it was to begin with, and look at the platform of how they're reinventing transportation today. Twitter, that's their first website, completely different from the world domination that they have today. Originally a side project for a podcasting company called Audio. Slack was also an internal project originally done for a gaming company. Startups have grown everywhere, and there are literally no corners of this earth where people aren't working on something new. In fact, some are fully distributed. Take Automatic and Basecamp, two startups very dear to my heart that have no physical place. People, working all over the world in a distributed fashion. I guess probably even more fashionable today. Some successes have been totally out of this world. Take Instagram. At 13 employees, they sold to Facebook for $1 billion. I mean, isn't that remarkable? Startups today have endless opportunities. You could get self-funded, get a company to fund your friends and family, raise money from VCs, and anybody can start anywhere with just a laptop in their kitchen, garage, living room, etc. There's also another dynamic at play. We've got these huge super apps such as Google Maps, Baidu, WeChat, Line, and so on. Huge players dominating verticals, capturing intent very early in the process. We've got immense connectivity and transparency, and workplace too. Anything you do ends up on a review site immediately the next day. Personalization, automation, AI, they're kind of de facto everywhere. This represents both opportunities as well as challenges. Do you choose to build your own verticals? Do you build on top of these platforms? So it's an interesting conundrum. I have another fairly challenging view, or rather I'd say controversial view, and that's that design in a traditional sense is dead. It's commoditized. What do I mean by that? Well, why reinvent new user experience paradigms when they're already invented? Why should you reinvent the wheel when you have patterns that already work? There's no point reinventing how you have your top hand navigation, search, etc. And take a look at these wonderful logos. They're all kind of converging, much further than the UI or design per se. I'd say, however, that experience design is not, and you can afford design companies. Take a look at Apple, of the entire process and how they go from, the moment that you walk into a store to unwrapping one of their products and the experience afterwards. Similarly, Starbucks, etc. So perhaps there's opportunity in going end to end in terms of experience. Now, given all this context, where are we going? What could be the startups of the future? Perhaps there could be a startup that has no team. In fact, I know a friend who has a business that turns over $100 million a year without staff. All they do is they outsource. They outsource their tech, they outsource their call center, they outsource some of the creative part. No team. What about the next one-person billion-dollar startup? Next unicorn. Could we assist at having a one-man show or one-woman show that's the next billion-dollar thing? Well, given the history of Instagram, why not? What about changing the funding paradigm? In other words, fund a person rather than a startup, given this dynamic. Or what about having much bigger startups that need no code? And there's a huge movement right now, this low code, no code movement. There's no reason why we couldn't have a platform that turns over millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, that had no code built in. What about decentralization? Would we end up having a blockchain-based ownership and decision making that's completely distributed and there's no single factor of making decisions? Why not? What about having no boss? Having an entire company run by an algorithm or by AI? There's no reason why not as well. Think ahead, think about the future. By 2050, over 10 billion people will be living on our planet, and that brings enormous other challenges. So I encourage everybody to drop the easy stuff. Let's build another ad thing, another ad platform. No disrespect to that, but perhaps it's time to embrace big problems. And one good place to go to is the Sustainable Development Goals, and try to pick very meaty, solid problems, like how could we generate more economic growth? How can we afford to have better quality of life, no poverty, quality education, on and on and on and on. At the same time, when all this population growth is happening, here's some examples of things we could do. The arable farmland is decreasing, so we need to produce more food with less. Why not take a challenge such as vertical farming on? It's not a very sexy industry, but it could be made very sexy with the use of robots and AI and produce a lot more in a lot less space with less water, better systems, etc. There are lots of other companies that tackle the food problem. Here's two others, Beyond Meat and Impossible, that are creating meat from plants, and you can taste their burgers already in many parts of the world. They use less land, less emissions, and less water. When it comes to automation, we have companies such as Boston Dynamics automating things like taking packages off trucks. So no more back problems, huge automation in terms of scale, and taking all the menial jobs that could be performed by robots. What about affordable housing? I found this company SQ4D that 3D printed the house in over 48 hours with less than $6,000 in materials. I mean, isn't this remarkable? Less than $6,000 in materials, 48 hours of print, and you could build a house. It's just incredible. What about connecting human brains with computers? There are already companies working on this. One notable one is Neuralink, which connects high bandwidth brain with computers, and that's Elon Musk's baby. Just recently, literally weeks ago, the University of Vermont and Tufts University built their first living robot that was designed in silico, in other words on the computer, but its realization was in vivo, in other words in a living organism. Life expectancy is expected to grow, and there are lots of companies working in the medical space. Here's an example, Ezra, who just got FDA approval for cancer detection using MRI at the early stage. I'd expect a lot more in that sector. There's a lot of miniaturization. If you think, if you look at the left-hand side of this image, that's a computer on top of grains of salt. Now, take a moment to realize the impact of such incredible miniaturization. Could you take it even further? How about having smart dust? But guess what? There's already a company working on that. Imagine what it's like to have dust with lots of sensors and flash memories and transmitters inside dust. Take this even further. What about neural dust, where you could inject a small sensor into, say, the nerve fiber of somebody and track their, vitals, etc. The advances in medical space, given the advances in miniaturization, are just astronomical. I also think that the next industrial revolution is energy. Why? Well, what is energy? Everything around us, even the ability for me to give this talk, requires energy. The water that comes to your house requires energy. The pumps need energy. So the world as we know it is energy. So the world is growing and it needs more of it, more abundant, more affordable, immediately available, clean, environmentally friendly. At the same time, we've got the advent of electric vehicles and solar and wind and all these clean energy sources that are very volatile, and the consumption is also volatile. So that puts strains on base power, and combine that with weather events. If you think of destabilizing situations, just look at Texas, look at California, look at other places in the world where these challenges have reached the point of complexity and criticality. What do I mean by that is that a single snowflake can cause an avalanche in terms of complexity theory, and how just a tiny event can destabilize say a grid, for example, or life as we know it. So this presents both challenges as well as huge opportunities. So I believe that we need to connect everything to everything, much bigger than the internet, in the sense that it's bigger than the IoT, much more complex, because we're not just dealing with bits here and there. Yeah, we've got real systems, smoke, fires, all sorts of other challenges, storage. Just think of, we need to store more energy, we need to manage it better, more systems, and I highly encourage people to take a hard look at the opportunities in this space. This is not going away, it's going to be bigger than everything we know it. But what about you? Given all this context, everything that I showed, what should you focus on? Well, this is your life, a typical 90-year human life in years, and we have a very small time frame, a very small opportunity. For some it's bigger, for some it's smaller, some starts early, for some starts a bit later, but why not start now? Start making a difference, try to invent, work very hard, generate value, generate energy on everything that you touch. But what if you treated yourself as a startup? I mean, all the good things: staying healthy, frugality, work on all the things that bring you ROI, learn, give, build relationship, produce value, make things, be a role model, continue to continuously improve. I think that probably the most important startup is you. And anything that you invest in you actually has value over the long run. You could build and you could learn how to treat others better, how do you treat companies, other people's money, and so on. And so in terms of creativity and investment, it's probably the really smart thing to do. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Arigato gozaimasu. Thank you so much.